Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link in association with the Tungsten Network, a Kofax product. It's great to have you with us today. Today we're looking at 90% touchless invoicing at John Lewis, and we're going to be zeroing in on the lessons learned. So my name is Susie West. I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and it's a pleasure to be introducing a long-standing member of Shared Services Link, Chris Darlington, who is Global Process and Systems Lead, Source to Settle and Finance at the John Lewis Partnership. And it's great to be having Alistair Corbett, who is the SVP of Sales at Tungsten Network, with us today. Of course, you have a key role to play, which is to make sure that you get your questions answered. So do post those through to me in the last, well, I will be addressing them in the last few minutes of the webinar, but if you could post those through to me sooner rather than later as the webinar goes along, and I'll put those questions to either Chris or Alistair on your behalf in the Q&A session, which is really the last 10 minutes of this webinar. We will be making the slides available, so if you did want to refer back to them at any time, you should be able to find them on sharedserviceslink.com. So let's have a look at the context for today. And when I'm speaking to many of our members, a lot of them are really focusing most of their efforts on touchless processing. So for some shared services, it's almost like a singular goal because it actually embodies so much as a KPI, and it really touches on many KPIs that a lot of shared services organizations care about. So first time match rate, cost per invoice, electronic invoice percentage, but also it connects very cleanly upwards to key goals for shared services organizations, which many shared services will put into kind of three buckets, if you wanted to put it like that, three kind of main pillars around cost reduction, process efficiency, and service excellence. Many of us will work with Hacker Group, and of course they work with these three pillars as well. So effectiveness, efficiency, and experience, the three E's. So something like touchless processing, it really is neatly kind of connected into those three pillars. And what we're hearing about today is how the John Lewis Partnership, really under the leadership of Chris, they've actually managed to attain 91% touchless invoicing with their in-scope Tungsten Network invoices. So he's going to be talking us through how they've actually got to touchless. So no touch on those invoices that come in at all. And he's going to be walking us through the journey that has taken them there, and also three major lessons learned, which Chris will be spending some time on in this webinar as well. So wherever you're at in your e-invoicing journey, your P2P automation journey, or your touchless journey, I'm very confident that you'll find a lot of useful information coming out of the next kind of hour or so. Alistair will join us towards the end of the session, and he will provide more detail on the Tungsten Network and how it actually is designed, yes, to get you to touchless, but whilst you're still dealing with paper as you move to touchless, they have a holistic solution to automate your entire invoice volume from day one. So he can talk more about that. And then we'll move to Q&A. So let's just do a couple of poll questions just before I hand over to Chris. So let's just find out the answer to the first question, please. What is your AP invoice volume each year? So looking at all your third-party invoices coming in from your third-party suppliers each year globally, what would you say the invoice volume is? So would you say it's less than 50,000, 50,000 to 200,000, 200,000 to 1 million, or do you process more than 1 million third-party invoices in your accounts payable team each year. So we're at about 55% of you responding. If we can get that number up a little bit more, and I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results here. Thank you. About 64% of you responding. So results coming up on your screen. We've got about 50% of you processing 200,000 invoices or more, and the other 50% a little bit less than that. So thank you for sharing that. Let's move on to the next poll question before I hand over to Chris. How automated are you today? So please tick all that apply, I think. Oh no, just one. You could just select one. So how automated are you today? Would you say you're rolling out e-invoicing, you're implementing OCR, you're implementing workflow, you're cleaning up your master data, or you're improving your matching rate today? Which one of those would you say is your main focus today? So we're at about 47% of you responding. So if you could let us know where you are today, and we'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look. Okay, so about a third of you are in an e-invoicing rollout. A third of you are improving your matching rate. That's a focus for you. And a third of you are somewhere in between, as it were, implementing OCR or workflow, or investing in cleaning up your master data. Great. So now is a good moment for me to hand over to Chris. Over to you, please, Chris.
Okay, and hopefully, Susie, you can see the slides coming through here now. Brilliant. Well, look, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining this webinar on the John Lewis story around touchless e-invoicing. I think it's really interesting to see those poll results coming back. So it seems like the vast majority of you are either doing electronic invoicing, or you're rolling it out, or you're trying to improve your touchless rate. And maybe the rest of you are even considering doing that as well. So let's have a look at some of the things in this presentation that John Lewis has been up to, and hopefully you'll find some bits of interest to you wherever you are on your journey. So first of all, a little look at what's coming up. So we're going to be talking about who I am and who John Lewis is, give you the background and the inside info on more about John Lewis. Then we'll move to looking at John Lewis Source to Settle in particular, give you some of the parameters of the company so you can understand where we found ourselves. We've got another poll coming up, and then the remainder of the deck is really on lessons learned. What did we learn really through this process, and what might you find interesting for us to share with you as well? So firstly, a slide by way of introduction. So this is me, and looking in rather more extreme conditions than where we find ourselves today. Yes, I am in fact a sailor when I'm not, as it says here, leading large-scale transformations in source to settle and finance. The left-hand picture, you can see me then freezing conditions, which explains why I had that very fetching neckerchief that you saw in the intro photograph there. That was probably about -8 that day, which is very cold to be out at sea in those conditions. And on the right-hand side, heading upwind and smashing, or as they call it in sailing, beating up through the sea. So that's the only way to unwind after a day of doing source to settle. I'm sure some of you will appreciate that. So before I was at John Lewis, I previously held consulting positions in IBM and also Oracle. And I was also part of the finance leadership team at HM Treasury, which is the UK Finance Ministry. So quite a broad tour of duty when it comes to all things source to settle and also finance. I've actually put my email address up there because you may get a question, who knows, that you don't get a chance to ask here and you want to discuss something. So I will try to answer any questions if you send those through. But let's keep on going and hear more about John Lewis. Well, if you're based in the UK, which I suspect many of you are, you know exactly who John Lewis and Waitrose is. But if you're not based in the UK, you've probably never heard of us because we are mainly a UK-based operation. We are in fact the largest employee-owned business in the UK. That's one of the most distinctive aspects of John Lewis. The other distinctive aspect is that it aims to make sufficient profit, which is a very novel idea. So we're not trying to maximize profit, we're just trying to make sufficient profit and profit that's sufficient to create a partnership that's fairer and more sustainable for all of our partners, which means our employees, our staff, because they own the business, partners, our customers, our suppliers, and also the communities that we serve. So it's a very distinctive business. It runs in a very distinctive way, it has a very distinctive history, and it's trying really hard to be a good corporate citizen in terms of how it works with its broader partnership. The two main brands of John Lewis Partnership are John Lewis, which is a department store business with an online presence, and also Waitrose, which is a supermarket business, again, with an online presence. But there are bits of the John Lewis Partnership that people often don't know about. So it also owns a textile factory, which is making cushions and pillows, curtains, soft furnishings, that sort of thing, which are sold through the shops. And also a 2,800-acre farm, which I think is a very nice feature of Waitrose, that Waitrose really has some good understanding of what it's like to work the land to produce food, because Waitrose itself is working the land and producing food and selling its produce through its shops. In total, the number of employees is around 74,000, which, as I say, are referred to as partners, as co-owners, and the turnover just north of 12 billion, or maybe just north of roughly $16 billion for those who understand it better in dollars, and approximately 20 million customers who are shopping in one of those brands over the course of the year. This is what John Lewis used to look like at the top. If you go back, this picture here probably taken in the 1870s. That's the Oxford Street store in London. That store is still there, although in a different building now. And there's a very old shot of the forerunner of Waitrose, Wait, Rose and Taylor. That picture probably taken around 1905, I would have thought, something like that. So, you know, this is a long-standing business with a very interesting heritage. Here's a look about John Lewis Finance in particular. So we're gradually working our way down to source to settle on this presentation, and then eventually touchless electronic invoicing. Like many finance departments, it's always evolving. It's just about to evolve again, which didn't make it in time for this cut of the slide. But this is kind of how finance is organised. As an executive director of finance, the group then subdivided in finance into commercial finance and procurement, which includes the procurement function. Corporate financing control, which has things like treasury, financial control, but it's also home to this centre here called the Centre for Accounting, which is the nearest thing we've got to a shared service centre. So we're not officially organised into a shared service centre that's spanning the different functions such as HR, IT, and finance. In practice, each of those areas have their own service centre, and we're the same here with our Centre for Accounting. And Centre for Accounting is containing all the operational parts of finance, so accounts payable, receivable, fixed assets, supplier support, customer support, you know, and so on and so on. In practice, that Centre for Accounting was formed by the brands giving up their individual finance operations historically. So John Lewis used to run a finance operations team. Waitrose, as shown here with WTR, used to run a finance operations team. So it's all kind of come into this finance service centre here. We also have an internal audit and risk arm, a big security and central operations arm, which is responsible for things like preventing theft, dealing with shrinkage or losses. You can imagine it's a very big operation for a retailer with hundreds of locations, millions of customers. You know, security and central ops is something that's always very important. And so the focus of today's presentation is really what's going on in procurement and Centre for Accounting, and particularly with the electronic invoicing bent in mind. And then the final thing you can see on this slide is for those who are interested in what technology we're running. So we are an Oracle Financials Release 12 house. We're just about to upgrade that from 12.1 to 12.2. And as part of that, we're moving to OCI, which is Oracle's cloud infrastructure. So strictly speaking, we still won't be running cloud finance by that stage, because we'll still be using Release 12 of Oracle Financials, but we will be running in a hosted environment for the very first time. And that's part of our stepping stone to the cloud, which we'll probably do in a couple of years' time after that. One of the reasons we haven't gone straight to the cloud for Oracle Finance is that we've been very busy rolling out Coupa over the past couple of years, and we've got about 4 more months still to go on Coupa. Also working very much with Tungsten, as you're going to hear in this presentation here. And we have a package called DIDOS, which is our direct accounts payable, as distinct from indirect, which is running on Coupa. And then also we're just starting to roll out Tableau. So Tableau is becoming our main BI, business intelligence platform for the group as a whole, and not just for finance. So let's say something more then around John Lewis Source to Settle. So what's going on in this area in particular? Well, the profile of Source to Settle is we process around about 2.5 million invoices a year. This is across direct and indirect, or as we would call it in retail, across goods for resale, which is direct, and goods not for resale, which is indirect. So I kind of stitch these two together to give you these numbers. And I'd say there's approximately 10,000 suppliers who are delivering all those goods and services, and roughly 12,000 staff partners, as we would call them, who are interacting with these processes. So probably 22,000 people getting involved with the kind of things we're discussing in this presentation today. And I've been investing in this process area for quite some years, and I continue to do it. So you can see with the colours here, I've done this in 2 time horizons. So the first horizon, number 1, is when I was investing in the requisition to invoice end of the process, which is the kind of classic, more the financy end of the process, raising requisitions orders, putting in receipts, taking electronic invoices. That's very much what that investment was about. And at that time, I was putting in Oracle P2P, so things like Oracle iProc, Oracle iSupplier, very much Tungsten going in as part of that as well. And the focus there was really on efficiency and effectiveness primarily. And so that was a very successful journey for efficiency and effectiveness. But what you've seen me doing over the past couple of years is replacing Oracle P2P with Coupa. And this wasn't just a straight technology swap, it was also about going wider in terms of what we were automating and improving the capability of. So if you see in yellow there, the focus of this was very much from source right the way through to settle. So this has included things like sourcing, contracting, third-party risk management, analytics, a lot of direct stuff coming into Coupa as well. So there's been a really big focus on third-party risk management and also procurement savings through this. So you can sort of see the maturity of the organization increasing over time from all manual to become more efficient and effective, to really start to iterate its risk management and procurement savings approach. You can sort of see that journey over time. Tungsten is still very much an important part of the mix on that. And for those who are wondering why, you'll see more of that as the presentation unfolds. But one of the things that drew us to Tungsten was the fact that it had a very large network of customers who were using Tungsten to provide their electronic invoicing service. Which meant that a lot of suppliers were already on the network. That was very advantageous to us. But the other factor is that Oracle P2P and, for that matter, Coupa don't have limitless numbers of formats of file that they can receive from suppliers into the system. So, in the case of Coupa, I think it will only support CXML and comma separated as like the main kind of formats that it will take. But as you'll see on our later slides, we've got suppliers who are doing everything from small suppliers who might just have a report that they can spit out of their ERP system, right the way through to suppliers that want to do full-blown, some full-blown proprietary file format. And so there was no way for us to kind of provide all that integration with suppliers unless we used a partner like Tungsten. So I guess the main reasons were reach and also technical capability, but you'll see some other points as we go. So what was the problem that we were facing when we did this? Well, the problem really was that all indirect and many direct invoices were on paper. So at that stage, we probably had still 800,000 invoices on paper. That's a lot of envelopes to open. That's a lot of manual processing to do. And notably, we had no use of purchase orders in indirect either. So people would just pick up the phone, order from suppliers, whatever they wanted. Maybe some of you know what that feels like. And in particular, all of our proofs of delivery, so this is where suppliers prove that they've delivered things if we think they haven't, all of our proofs of delivery were on paper in direct, and in particular our accounts payable for direct was running on this manual legacy mainframe system. So this was a really sort of old school manual world, which is where we found ourselves when we began this journey. So the solutions really broke down into two. What would we do for indirect, and what would we do for direct? And for indirect, we at the time went for mandatory use of purchase orders via Oracle iProcurement. For our suppliers, it was mandatory use of electronic invoicing via either Tungsten or iSupplier, which is Oracle's supplier portal module. And also all suppliers will be able to do account inquiry via Oracle iSupplier as well. On the direct side, electronic invoicing was already happening via EDI, that's electronic data interchange. That's very common in retailers to find EDI invoicing for bigger suppliers. That's been going on for a very long time in retail, probably 20 years or so. But what we wanted to do was to roll out Oracle iSupplier to give suppliers a choice, because many of our smaller suppliers, which number hundreds of thousands of invoices, so there's a lot of volume, they cannot get to grips with EDI. That's not surprising to me. EDI is a very complicated and technical protocol, so offering a portal-based solution was an ideal way to pick them up. We also wanted to roll out account inquiry, proofs of delivery via Oracle iSupplier, and also to roll out invoice matching via this thing called DDoS, which I mentioned earlier, which is a retail-specific invoice matching solution for direct spend. And what I suspected would happen is that larger suppliers would flock to Tungsten and smaller suppliers would flock to iSupplier, and that's exactly what happened. Large suppliers have got a lot of volume. They really want to use that Tungsten integration with us, because we also offered a choice of Oracle iSupplier. Smaller suppliers were more interested in that. Every client will differ on this. Many clients will just say, Tungsten, we want you to run the whole thing. Obviously, Tungsten more than capable of doing that. But in our case, our business is so complicated that we had many other transaction types that we knew we had to roll out on a portal. And so that includes things like, as I said, proofs of delivery and some of the more complex account inquiry features that we knew we'd have to offer ourselves. So that's very much why we were a two-solution organization here. Let's say a little word then around the project team and how long this lasted for then. So you can see my role of global process lead on here. What I'm showing you is the team that rolled out electronic invoicing and also iProcurement. In reality, the individuals in these roles varied over time. So it's always difficult to try and freeze the organizational structure, just on one slide. But what I would say to you is these were all full-time roles. So whereas the individuals that held them might have varied over time, this is really the full-time structure that we ran. So I had a project manager assisting me with the management of this. In the middle, you can see a technical team of about 10. It was the job of the technical team to do things like design, build, test of things like iSupplier, the integration into Tungsten and back again, networks, anything like that that's technical. On the left, we had a supplier adoption arm, and on the right, we had an employee adoption arm. So the supplier adoption arm was a big investment I was making here of 7 full-time people, and their job was to do nothing but support suppliers, help suppliers, get suppliers ready for the changes that were coming. We're going to be saying more on that in the following slides. And on the right-hand side, you had employee adoption. So again, a similar sort of team, another 7 people who were working to get our staff around the group, our partners, using requisitions, purchase orders, and things of that sort. In terms of how long it took us to get this up and running and mature, I would say it was about a 2-year journey, to give you a feel for that. But keep in mind that for much of the first year, we were implementing, configuring and implementing Oracle iSupplier. So we had a bigger technical footprint than some clients would necessarily have. So I'd say the first year was really all around getting our own systems ready and also working with Tungsten. And then in the second year, we were very much rolling out, managing compliance, getting suppliers signed onto the network and so on. So probably a 2-year journey all told to get this done. One of the comments I'd make about having a supplier adoption team in here is that some people will just outsource the adoption to, let's say, a company like Tungsten. Tungsten's got many ways that they can reach suppliers and get this done for you. But as I'll be covering in later slides, organizations differ in terms of their culture. And I'll be explaining why in later slides we felt we wanted to have more control over the way suppliers were being adopted. But before we say more on that, let's go to Susie. I think we've got another poll coming, Susie.
We do indeed. So coming up on your screen now. So what are you looking to focus on in the next 12 to 24 months? Please tick all that apply. Are you looking at rolling out your e-invoicing program? Are you implementing OCR? Are you implementing workflow? Are you looking to clean up your master data, or are you looking to improve your match rate? Please tick all that apply. So similar to a previous poll, but ever so slightly different, really focusing on where your attention is going to be in the next 12 to 24 months. So closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, thank you. And I'll share those results with you. So 78% of you are looking at e-invoicing rollout, followed by 54% of you talking about improving your match rate, and then all in the 30s implementing OCR workflow and cleaning up master data. So thank you for that. So looking at particular requirements that are important to you when thinking about e-invoicing, which ones would you say are the most important features to you? Would you say it's the network's ability to take any file format from your suppliers? Is it the network's ability to onboard suppliers? Is it the network's level of invoice compliance globally? Maybe the network's ability to deal with the tail, your smaller suppliers? Or would you say it's pretty much just reliant on the business case? So if you could tick all that apply there for me, and I will be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on the screen now. So thanks for that. 64% of you responded. So interestingly, the 57% of you talking about the network's ability to onboard suppliers, and in joint second place, the network's ability to take any file format and be compliant with all the mandates that are coming out. And then in joint fourth and fifth place, we've got the network's ability to deal with the tail and the business case. So interesting. Back to you, please, Chris.
Thanks very much, Susie. Well, we're coming to the main meat of the presentation, I guess, around lessons learned for John Lewis and things which you might find interesting. And then we'll have a roundup on the results. So what did it lead to in terms of business outcomes? So the first lesson to draw attention to is around investing in supplier adoption. And as I was saying earlier, organizations have different cultures in terms of how they will approach this. There are some organizations that will literally just say, Tungsten, please roll out to our suppliers. What I think Tungsten would always say in a situation like that, certainly from my experience, is they would expect at least some ownership or escalation to kind of reside within your corporate, but they'd be very happy to kind of do the rollout for you. In the case of John Lewis, though, we really wanted to kind of own this because, as I said, this is a very distinctive business, and I've given some examples of that here. So, we viewed this as these were our suppliers, these were our relationships, this is our culture. We wanted to kind of really own this. Our purpose statement says that we work together to create a successful business and a fairer, more sustainable future for partners, customers, suppliers, and communities. And in particular, our constitution, rule number 96, says the partnership's relationships with its suppliers must be based, as with customers, on honesty, fairness, courtesy, and promptness. And then finally, Waitrose is in a regulated sector. It's regulated by the Grocery Supply Code of Practice, which regulates how retailers work with their suppliers to make sure that suppliers are being fairly treated. So when you put all of that together, trying to be fair and courteous and prompt, to discharge our duties fully under the regulation in one of our industries, thinking about the distinctive aspects of our constitution, it was a no-brainer for us as to why we would want to own and front up with suppliers on this. So as I said, we put significant supplier adoption resources in, a total of 7 people working for probably just over a year in that 2-year period. And that was very much to ensure that suppliers were fully supported through the changes. This is the approach that we followed in green down the bottom. So first of all, we spent time preparing the business, making sure that our partners in the business, our employees, making sure that they really understood what was coming, why it was happening, what it meant for their suppliers. what their role would be in this, because we'd expect them to voice over with their suppliers to encourage supplier compliance. So we really made sure we went nowhere near suppliers until our business understood what was going on. We then moved on to preparing the suppliers themselves, and that was done very much through a "It's Coming" campaign. And you've got to bear in mind, at the time we were doing this, which is quite a few years ago now when we first did this, we didn't even have email addresses for most of our suppliers. So we actually chose to go out by post and email. So we tried to reach suppliers in every way that we could. And that "It's Coming" campaign was kind of saying, this is what's coming, this is what you need to be aware of. And it was clarifying they'd have a choice between Tungsten or iSupplier as their main two choices. That was then backed up by an outbound calling campaign, which was run by the team of 7 that I was mentioning earlier. And that team of 7 made sure they called every single one of our suppliers to say to them, "Did you get the letter?" They would usually say, "Oh no, I don't remember receiving that." You know how it is when you send out letters. So we would explain them the letter again on the call, and we would say to them, how many invoices did they do? Would it feel more appropriate to run iSupplier or on Tungsten? So the aim of those calls was to get suppliers feeling really prepped and that they knew what was happening, but also to make a choice around, would it be Tungsten, would it be iSupplier? If it was Tungsten, we'd hand over to Tungsten to carry on the onboarding process. If it was iSupplier, we would obviously carry on doing that ourselves. And so by the end of this campaign, we got through pretty much all of our suppliers and we got them to make a choice. And so then it was a question of waiting for go live. And when it was there, we sent out an "It's Here" campaign to say, from today, make sure that you are using our solutions to send your invoices. We can't accept paper anymore. And I would say, many of you probably have this experience. You get a certain group of suppliers who comply, and you get a certain group of suppliers that don't comply. And that was nothing different in this particular campaign here. So our focus started out with more support, with more outreach to our suppliers. We would ring them and sit with them while they did their first invoice, even, for example, and make sure they got it done, and we were there helping them, talking them through it. We really went the extra mile to kind of live out this constitutional and purpose statements that you can see here. But the reality is, at the end of it, there was still a group of suppliers who were just sending in paper and ignoring all attempts to get them to use the solutions. And so we had to begin compliance action then, which was at a certain point where we had literally bent over backwards to help suppliers get ready for this. We stopped accepting paper. And at that stage, we would send back any paper invoice that we received, and we'd say, you need to crack on and start using these solutions. And, you'll see the numbers later on in the campaign, but the reality is that with this degree of support, with this choice of solutions, there weren't really any barriers for suppliers to get this done. So once we started rejecting paper, they knew that was the time that they really had to take part. And one thing I would say for suppliers actually as well is, actually there's a lot of things in their interest, because if they use electronic invoicing, we will get the invoice faster than if they send it in the post. And if we get it faster, they're more likely to be paid on time, they're less likely to have to raise any queries. So, we really stressed what was in it for suppliers as much as what was in it for us in terms of efficiency and effectiveness as well. This is the second lesson for you: any file, any format. I was kind of hinting at this earlier. John Lewis basically wants, when it comes to classic file-based electronic invoicing, so I'm not talking about the portal here, but around the classic file-based electronic invoicing, what John Lewis really wants is this thing called a tilde delimited invoice file, which it can load into its ERP solution. What it can't possibly cope with is suppliers who can only do CXML or tab separated or Sage Accounts or QuickBooks, etc., etc. So, trying to work directly with so many suppliers and so many different protocols would just be a nightmare for us. As I said, we couldn't even do that through Cooper or through Oracle, because there aren't out-of-the-box protocols that cover that full range of things in our supply base. And this is really where Tungsten comes in, for me anyway, that they are, for me, my converter. So they're converting the format of file, they're my enricher, and they're my validator, as I'm going to be saying in a minute. So they're enriching the data that's coming in, they're validating the data that's coming in, and I'm getting a pretty high quality feed from them that I can then process. Let's take a look at the third lesson then, which is a relentless focus on data. A relentless focus on data. Now, when you talk to clients who are considering electronic invoicing programs, a lot of them will say, I just want the suppliers to stop sending paper. I just want the suppliers to comply. I just want the suppliers to use our solutions. We need to get compliance up with our suppliers. That's often how you'll hear clients talk. They're not wrong to say those things. You know, if suppliers don't comply, then you can never realize the true potential of these programs. But there's another part of this I want to draw attention to in this lesson, which is not only what the suppliers are doing, but what you're doing in terms of getting ready with your data and in terms of making sure that you can get high rates of touchless processing when suppliers do comply with your services. What you can see on the screen here is an example of a purchase order number 101, which has 4 lines on it: red pen, refill, blue pen, envelopes, quantities, prices, amounts, part numbers. This is a classic purchase order, the like of which I guess many of you will recognize. One of the problems that you have with electronic invoice campaigns that are file-based, so file-based electronic invoicing campaigns, is that suppliers will often send in invoices like this, invoice 1086, for all the right items with all the right quantities and prices, etc. And they can even quote PO number, which is great, but a lot of suppliers can't quote purchase order line number. And if you were to just leave it like that and the invoice were to arrive, there's no way your ERP would know which line on that invoice relates to which line on the order, and so someone would have to manually match that with an accounts payable. So one of the great things we were able to do with Tungsten is to get them to build custom enrichment rules for us to help us derive line numbers on the basis of other data which is on that transaction. So in this example I've drawn for you here, you can see that on this line, Tungsten's got a match on part number, which is ENVO8, matching this ENVO8 line on here. And so it's been able to derive line 4. Likewise, it's got a match on unit price here of 57 pence, as you can see. It didn't get a match on part number because the supplier called it RPC34 to our RPD34. Here we've got a match on net amount. Here we've got a match on part number. So you can see even though the supplier in this case couldn't quote any line data, we still got a touchless match coming through. This is the algorithm that I put together with Tungsten. This is all custom to John Lewis. This is another reason we wanted to use Tungsten, because it's very good at writing custom routines like this. You know, we go for part number matching exactly, description matching with a bit of tolerance, price matching. We go for price and quantity swapped over, because that's a common problem with suppliers where they swap over the price and the quantity. So we try and swap that back with Tungsten, see if that helps. We have price with a bit of tolerance on there, 2p. We go for line amounts. And then there's also things I've done within the ERP solution that you might want to consider. So if you've got a single line purchase order, you can have the ERP say, well, if there's no line number, but the PO number relates to a single line order, I'm going to assume it's that single line and get the matching done. And the other good thing you should think about in your ERP, if you haven't already, is how to deal with service-based invoices. Amount-based, service-based, invoices. This is a problem because typically you're always better off raising amount-based transactions as like 1,000 at £1, meaning £1,000 worth of a service. Because when the supplier needs to part invoice that at, let's say, £650, you can then just say the quantity is 650, the price is £1. You can just receipt 650 and everybody's happy. But actually, if you were to try and say 1 at 1,000, it starts to get really complicated, because you then got to receipt part of 1 unit. You'd have to receipt, let's say, 0.65 of a unit to say that you want to be able to pay 650. So it's always better to have the value in the quantity field and the price at £1. But what's frustrating with suppliers is they will often swap it back when you send out the purchase order like that. So they will often invoice you 1 at £1,000. And obviously that's disastrous for your ERP then, because let's say you've receipted all 1,000, you're accruing for 1,000 on goods received not invoiced. The supplier then sends in 1 at 1,000. The invoice goes on hold because of price variance. The invoice is accruing 1,000. So you end up with 2,000 then in your ERP, and this is a really thorny problem for those of us who have lots of services. So what we've done here is on the ERP, we automatically set the price back to £1 on service-based invoices, and we get the ERP to reconstruct the quantity to keep the supplier's value in the quantity field. And that means even if the supplier's got it the wrong way around, it still comes in the right way around, and then we have a touchless match when it comes in. So I really encourage you to think about what could a provider like Tungsten do for you? What could you do in your ERP solution to help the touchless matching work well. There's some other things you can do on this to give yourself the best chance. I'll bet there's all of you on this call have had situations like this where annoying end users will raise purchase orders called as per phone call, and they just push, like, I can sure one or two of you nodding there. They've raised it for 1 at 91.55, exactly the wrong way around, as we were saying on the previous conversation. Rolling out catalogs is a really key way of dealing with that, because then you'll get more structured data on the order line, better matching with the invoice. To give you some idea, we've probably rolled out now 5,000 supplier catalogs, something like that. So we are heavily choreographed in terms of how people are reaching our suppliers. This is another no-no for you on the data front. Don't allow people to put the same item more than once. So you can see here somebody's put the red pen on line 1, they put the red pen on line 3. This is problematic because, again, Tungsten won't know which red pen on the invoice relates to which red pen line on the order. And, so we've put technology within the ERP to stop people being able to raise orders like this with more than one item. So it would have been better if they'd raised it, 2 rather than 1. And then the one I mentioned earlier to you around, find a way to stop your users doing 1 at. They should be doing so much at 1, because that's so much easier to manage the receipting and the invoicing when they do that. So let's say something then to close with around the results of this campaign. So when you sort of add it all up together, the investment we made in onboarding, the investment we made in technology, the compliance work that we did, the use of the network, the algorithm that we wrote to drive up matching levels, our preparedness on data, you put all of that together, what did it add up to? Well, across direct and indirect as a whole, you can see 95% electronic invoicing off the back of that. The 5% that isn't are all the things that will never be electronic invoicing. It's things like where you're making lease payments to landlords, lease payments aren't invoiced, they're just on a payment schedule, or it's where a government entity needs paying some money, they're not going to invoice you, you just have to pay them the taxes that you owe. So there's always reasons why people now are not on e-invoicing that frankly are beyond the control of an e-invoicing program. 98% of invoices that are coming in are matched. 91% on Tungsten, so this next statistic is a Tungsten number here. 91% of the Tungsten volume is touchless, which is a great score. We wouldn't have got there without those kind of algorithms I was speaking about earlier. Our cycle time is 5 days. That means it takes us about 5 days to get ready to pay an invoice. That's important for you to keep a focus on in case you want to do supply chain financing or dynamic discounting. You want to be ready to pay invoices early, so your suppliers could potentially access discounting programs with you at some point in the future. So 5 days is a good thing to see. Proofs of delivery all coming in 100% now. And look at this number here, 83 fewer people in accounts payable because of these kinds of efficiencies that we've done in this process area here. And the thing I feel really pleased about is, again, John Lewis Partnership difference, there's a free option available for every supplier. So with the way we roll this out, nobody has to pay anything. They can do the whole thing free, or they can have a fully convenient service through Tungsten. And as I said, bigger suppliers doing disproportionate volume on Tungsten, and the smaller ones have gone for the free solution. So thanks so much for listening to that. And now handing back to Susie.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And now let's bring Alistair into the conversation. Over to you, Alistair.
Hello, everybody. So, firstly, let me take you through how the Tungsten network operates. So, if you see on the left-hand side, a supplier can provide their invoice in any format. They can do this through a web portal. They can do this through a direct integration from their ERP, or the invoice can come through some government clearance portal or through one of the interop partners. Once the data is received within Tungsten, we then go through 3 stages of validation for that invoice. The first stage is to confirm that it's a legal invoice. They've got the legal entity, it's got proper dates, it's got values within that. The second stage is actually looking at whether it complies with that country's rules, the mandated rules for that country. Classically, these would be VAT related, making sure that the VAT numbers is stated the correct values and percentages are shown on the invoices. And then the last stage of checks is the business rules, all the algorithms that Chris just talked about. And these are those that you set up within there, the invoices you want to do and how you want the invoices to come through. If the invoice does not pass all three of those tests, it is then rejected and the supplier has to resubmit the invoice. If it does pass it, then we create the legal artifact. It then becomes the legal invoice at the point we've accepted it, and it gets posted directly onto your ERP. What we can do in addition to that, we can take the PO data, and this is actually to do the enrichment that Chris talked about earlier, where you can do far better algorithms around checking whether it meets the individual PO line details. And the last thing we can do is send through the invoice status. So a supplier is able to go on the portal and understand exactly where it is in the approval cycle, whether it's been received, it's approved, at what point it's expecting payment. What we find with this is that this saves substantial amount of time for the AP teams because they're not having to answer questions or similar questions. The suppliers can get the information directly. Now, with Tungsten joining Kofax, we have the ability to extend the processing from not just electronic invoices, but also to include paper and PDF. Through a product that Kofax called AP Essentials, we're able to capture the information from paper and PDF, which can be emailed in or scanned in, and actually go through exactly the same validation and actually post it directly into the ERP, enabling us to address all the different invoices within a customer. Now, if we then start looking at, I want to have a step back to look a bit at the market trends. And as you've seen over the last few years, what has been a very direct trend is actually moving away from paper and PDF into e-invoicing. Now, the Tungsten solution has came about and it was brought in specifically to address those invoice formats, the electronic invoice formats. And now coming in with Kofax, what we're able to do is actually address the whole marketplace. As I said before, we now have the ability to actually do the automated processing of all invoices. But on top of that, with the additional capabilities we've got some workflow products which are able to manage the approval and exceptions and also manage the whole payment processes. So combined, what we now believe is we have probably the most complete solution to automate your whole AP processes. I think that one element that Chris talked to, which I think comes about as one of the most significant things about going live with an e-invoicing platform, is the supplier onboarding and the engagement with suppliers. With 23 years experience, we believe we worked in the best-in-class process about how we can get your suppliers on board onto the network. We have a dedicated team who go through a standardized and repeatable process to enable us to contact your suppliers and get them onto the network, basically. The process follows that firstly, we take your customer data. So we go through some cleanup, integrity of the data, and actually then match it against the existing suppliers we have on the network. Classically, we get around about a 25 to 25% average match rate on those, but in some industries, we can get that as much as 70% of customer suppliers already existing on the network. If the supplier already exists on the network, then it's very simply that we can then point them towards your own ERP, and actually we can be directly on the network very quickly. For those, then once we've actually completed this match and actually have the remaining suppliers, we then separate those. We separate those into the strategic or larger volume suppliers and the tail or smaller volume suppliers. The strategic larger volume suppliers, the activity we take is a very multi-touch approach. We call them, we email them, we carry out webinars to actually try and encourage as many of those onto the network as quickly as possible. With the tail suppliers, what we we carry out a marketing campaign and set up easy online enrollment programs so that they can come online and actually access directly into the network. All of this program is run by a dedicated project manager, and we have experienced this, as I said, over 23 years, and we are very confident in our approach to get a large number of your vendors onto the network, and so confident that when we sign up new customers, we're willing to take an SLA that we will commit to getting a certain percentage of your invoice volume onto the network within an agreed time frame. So overall, just to summarize it, the one thing I wanted to talk through is we now provide a very comprehensive solution that will enable us to help automate you across your whole AP process and across every invoice format. We incorporate within that all the key elements which actually are relevant for being successful within an automating and a touchless processing, which is any-to-any data, the data enrichment side of it, and we have in place a sort of best-in-class supplier onboarding program where we can enable you to get up and running in the most effective way in the fastest time. And
great.
thank you.
Thank you so much, Alistair. This has been incredibly useful. So we've got a good number of questions, which I will put to both you and Chris. So let's do that. And whilst we do that as well, let's just finish with a closing poll as well. What would you like to do next? I'll leave this open for a little bit. Would you like to set up a demo with Tungsten? Would you like to subscribe to Tungsten's e-invoicing compliance updates? Or would you like to subscribe to the Tungsten newsletter? Right, so some questions, please. Chris, if I can put this one to you, did you mandate the adoption of Tungsten with your suppliers while giving them the option, or sorry, I'll start again. Did you mandate the adoption of e-invoicing with your suppliers while giving them the option of the solution to choose?
Yes.
And if so, what was the impact on your supplier relationships?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it was. We made clear that we expected suppliers to take part, and we said that in our campaign from the off that we would normally only work with suppliers who would work with us electronically, on the ground that it was actually in their interest and ours to do so. And we really stressed those benefits in that letter. They'd be getting a purchase order number, more accurate matching. We would get the invoice more quickly than on the post. It wouldn't take us as long to process it. There'd be more on-time payments. There was just literally so much in it for suppliers and us. It was a kind of win-win, and we really talked that up and helped them understand it. I also think it was actually advantageous to have a choice of technologies. So whoever has asked that clever question, I think it was actually advantageous that there was a choice, because it meant the conversation wasn't will you do this or won't you? It was then which would you like to do? And I think that sort of subtly kind of altered the conversation with suppliers and so, well, I think maybe that one's better for me. It sort of shifted the basis on which we were having it. The reaction from the suppliers was that larger accounts that are doing very high volume definitely want Tungsten. They're not going to use a portal solution for that. And SME organizations, were happier with the portal. And yeah, now the stories you see is everybody is complying, thankfully. Thankfully.
Great. Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. And a question here, again for you, Chris. Could you explain the EPOD in a bit more detail?
Yes. So essentially, EPOD is just saying the supplier says he delivered the goods, and one of our locations has no record of those goods being delivered. So in a situation like that, we would ask for a proof of delivery, which is where every shipment that's been left with one of our mail rooms, they would get a signature to say that it had been accepted by us as a shipment, and they'd be expected to produce that. And what it means is they can upload a scan then of that proof of delivery into our ERP, and then we can say to our location, I know you think you didn't get it, but here's the proof of delivery that the supplier has managed to get hold of. And then they'll go, oh gosh, yeah, that's one of our people who signed for it, so we must have had it. So proofs of delivery are very helpful for resolving those situations with goods where we have no record of it and the supplier is sure that he delivered it. Yeah.
Great. What would your advice be to a finance organisation that is struggling with its relationship with procurement? And that's to Chris, and then
Well,
I'll bring
that is older
Alice.
than the hills, that question, isn't it? And a very valid question indeed. I think part of the answer to that is to try to form, to get this viewed as a source to settle flow and not a procurement or a finance flow. So in our case, the heads of procurement and finance together understand their obligations on the flow as a whole. So I think that that's definitely part of it. But the reality also is that unhappy suppliers will lead to unhappy buyers. I mean, that is the reality of it, that buyers will struggle to do deals with suppliers if suppliers aren't getting paid or whatever. So I think helping buyers to understand the impact on their accounts of this going wrong is also important. I might also add that it is actually very helpful to have procurement and finance both within the finance director's span of control, if at all possible, because it's not then procurement over here and finance over here. There are essentially two departments in the same organisation. I won't say we've entirely cracked that, but I will say that those two things we're describing have gone quite a way along the road to making a success of that.
Great. And Alistair, anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think, you know, I'd agree. I think that what we find is that when there is alignment on particularly the objective of implementing an e-invoice system between procurement and finance, both teams actually see it and they buy into it. We find it's a far more successful implementation. And it is looking at joint things, and as Chris mentioned, I think there's values to both procurement and to finance from this process.
Okay, good. In terms of industries, is Tungsten Network pretty much industry agnostic, or does it specialise in particular industries like retail?
It is agnostic. I mean, fundamentally, it is about processing invoices, which applies to just about every single industry. I think the value, the larger the volume, actually tends to be a better business case behind that, but it is completely against any industry.
Okay. And Chris, back to you regarding overseas cross-border invoices. Were the majority of your invoices UK-based?
Well, no. I mean, actually, so if you think we have a massive global supply chain that's delivering products from all over the world, food from Europe, you know, department store product lines from the Far East. So there's a very high foreign invoice count. And I mean, that was also one of the reasons why Tungsten was helpful, because it had got accreditation in those jurisdictions. But the other factor to think about if you're going to own the onboarding like we did is you really need to think about translations of some of your user guides, maybe thinking about who's got language skills across the organisation as a whole and drafting them in for some of those conversations. So that does make a real difference with foreign suppliers. Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. All right. Well, look, Chris, Alistair, thank you so much for all of your input for today. And we look forward to seeing everyone else on the line for our next webinars that we've got coming up over the next few weeks. But for the time being, good luck with your e-invoicing program, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thanks and goodbye.